Three, two, one. On today's show, the Cavs got good news yesterday when the All-Star ballots were released. And not just that Donovan Mitchell's going to be starting the All-Star game. Plus, we'll talk about Evan Mobley's calf injury and honor that is on the way for Kenny Atkinson and a few more things on this Friday 5 edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show, of course, sponsored by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. The Friday 5 is here. This is week number 2 of doing this. This is going to be just about an every Friday thing. The way things work here, I'm going to have 5 topics. Going to talk about each topic for 5 minutes. And that is sort of not a week in review type show, but it's the 5 things that are on my mind that have to do with the Cleveland Cavaliers, or at least Cavaliers adjacent. And also, as a heads up, if you missed my interview with Cavs assistant coach Jordan Ott, that came out earlier Friday morning. That should be the first thing in your podcast feed on Friday. Search it on YouTube. Great interview. Certainly something that you don't want to miss. But without anything else, let's get started on the Friday 5. 5 topics, 5 minutes each. And we're starting with the All-Star voting results. So we know Donovan Mitchell voted in as an All-Star starter for the 2nd time in his career, the 6th time that he's been voted in as a starter. And I want to start in the guards here. I'm going to spend 10 minutes talking All-Star because I've got stuff on Evan Mobley too that I'm going to spend the second 5 minutes talking about. But I want to begin with Darius Garland. So it was no surprise that Donovan Mitchell was voted an All-Star, right? I think everybody anticipated that he would be. He was the number 2 vote getter amongst fans in all of the voting returns that had happened the previous few weeks. So I don't think it was a shock. And he finished first amongst player voting. He finished first amongst media voting, and he finished ultimately second amongst fan voting. That, of course, leads you to being in the top 2, which means you're a starter. But I don't want to say the bigger news, but important news probably makes more sense here for the Cavs is that Jalen Brunson was the other starter alongside Donovan Mitchell. Now, I think Jalen Brunson is very deserving of that honor. I think Jalen has had a fantastic season for the New York Knicks, and him being an All-Star starter, not a surprise to me. But what that does mean, and you might be sitting here, well, Darius Garland should be an All-Star starter. You have an argument. And I think a lot of people in the media certainly felt that you had an argument. And certainly there were some players that felt as if you have an argument in saying that. But the best news for the Cavs and Cavs fans coming out of the All-Star voting is that LaMelo Ball is not a starter. Because if LaMelo Ball were a starter, what would that mean? It would mean LaMelo Ball is an All-Star. I would not anticipate that LaMelo Ball is going to be an All-Star. I think his only route to getting into that game was through the fan vote. He finished number 1, but he finished pretty far down the list in media voting. That is what kept him out because the players did vote for him, but he finished, I believe, 7th or 8th amongst media voting. Only 3 media members voted LaMelo Ball as an All-Star starter. I think that's appropriate. I don't believe that he should be an All-Star, let alone a starter. Now, how does this connect to Darius Garland? Well, one, LaMelo Ball, most likely now not being on the All-Star team, opens up another spot for Darius Garland in the Eastern Conference backcourt. And 2, the thing that I think is a little bit more important here is how the media voted, because I think that the media does take this very seriously. I'm not somebody that has a vote for these types of things, but I certainly have friends that do have a vote for these types of things, and all of them take this very, very seriously. I don't know anybody in the media that has a vote that doesn't take this seriously. I can't necessarily say the same thing about players, but I do believe that the media takes this seriously, and relatively speaking, does a good job of selecting the players that are the most deserving. The media voted Darius Garland third amongst Eastern Conference guards. He was only behind Donovan, who was first, Jalen Brunson, who was second, and then it was Darius Garland. He didn't get a ton of votes, but the fact that those were the only two guards that were voted ahead of him by the media, I think says a lot. And I think that the way the media votes for these things is something that's going to align pretty closely, because now Darius Garland's route to getting into the game is by being selected by the other coaches, by the Eastern Conference coaches, that they vote for the All-Star reserves. And the caveat here is that, you cannot vote for your own players. So Kenny Atkinson, for as much as he thinks Darius Garland does deserve to be an All-Star, he's not allowed to vote for Darius Garland. His votes will have to go to players on other teams. And it works that way everywhere. Like JB Bickerstaff can't vote Cade Cunningham. Maybe he'll vote Darius Garland. I don't know. But that's how this now gets decided. I think that the way the coaches vote is going to align relatively similarly to the way that the media votes. So the fact that Darius Garland finished third in the media vote, I think, is a pretty important thing. And I think it's just as important that LaMelo Ball did not get into the game. I was thinking before the season, well, Darius Garland's pathway to being an All-Star is pretty narrow. And then even a couple of weeks ago, when we saw the voting returns, we saw that LaMelo Ball was the lead vote getter amongst Eastern Conference guards. Thought, man, that might be something that really submarines Darius Garland's chances of being an All-Star. Now, since then, I think Darius has played even better. And I think that he's probably more deserving right now of being an All-Star. Wednesday night's missed free throws notwithstanding here, I think he's more deserving of being an All-Star now than he was a month ago. I think he's played better basketball. And I think ultimately the news that we got that Donovan Mitchell is starting the All-Star game is great. But I think the news that we didn't technically get is that Darius Garland is going to be an All-Star too. All right, topic number 2, Evan Mobley's All-Star case. So he, like Darius, was not named a starter in the front court. The Eastern Conference starting front court for the All-Star game, Giannis Antetokounmpo, pretty good selection. No argument there. Jason Tatum, pretty good selection. No argument there. Karl-Anthony Towns, pretty good selection. No argument there. Those were the top 3 vote getters in the fan vote. Those were the top 3 vote getters in the player vote. Those were the top 3 vote getters in the media. It was a clean sweep. There was no controversy there the way there was in the backcourt with LaMelo Ball. Those 3 guys, I think, were always going to be locked in at those spots. Like the backcourt, what I find very interesting is how the rest of the voting went, because Evan Mobley finished 5th in total among the Eastern Conference front court players. 4th place was Paolo Banchero, because the fan vote matters so much. And Evan didn't do great in the fan vote, but he was up there in the fan vote. However, he finished 4th amongst player vote, which I think of something as, wow, players are really respecting who Evan Mobley is as a basketball player and what his season has meant not only to him offensively, but to the team success of the Cavaliers. But as I talked about with Darius Garland, Evan Mobley finished 4th in the media vote too. And here is where this is even more interesting. So there were 95 media members that turned in All-Star votes. And Giannis, as I mentioned, very deserving. All 95 media members that voted for All-Star starters voted for Giannis Antetokounmpo to be an All-Star starter, as it should be. All 95 media members that voted for Jason Tatum to be an All-Star, or that voted for All-Star starters, voted for Jason Tatum to be an All-Star starter. 91 media members that voted for All-Star starters voted for Karl-Anthony Towns to be an All-Star starter. The other 4 voted for Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley is the only player that is not in the Eastern Conference front court that is not a starter that got an All-Star starter vote. Paolo Banchero didn't, because he's only played 11 games as we record this. No other player did receive a media vote. And as I mentioned with Darius Garland, I think the fact that the coaching votes will most likely align with the media votes is a really good sign that Evan Mobley is going to be in San Francisco as an All-Star in February for the first time. And the first All-Star game, of course, is the most difficult ones for players to make, right? Like, you really, I think, have to not overachieve, but you have to leave very little doubt about the type of player that you are, that you truly do belong amongst the great players in the NBA at an all-star game. It's very rare that fluke type seasons find their way into an all-star game. Evan Mobley's season is not a fluke. Evan Mobley, I believe, is going to be an all-star for many years to come, and this is going to be the first of perennial appearances. I think he's going to be able to cancel his vacation plans over the all-star break for the next several years, and he's going to plan on being in whatever city the all-star game is in. I think that the news the Cavs got, again, not just Donovan Mitchell starting. I know that's the only press release that got sent out, and that's the only thing that technically did happen. But I think with how Evan Mobley's voting went, with how Darius Garland's voting went, and how that the reserves are selected, I think both those guys are going to be in San Francisco for the All-Star game. It'll be Darius Garland's second All-Star game. It'll be Evan Mobley's first All-Star game. I also thought it was very interesting that Evan was the only other player that received a vote in the front court. Now, there are, I think, a number of really good front court players, but I do think that the front court is thinner than the backcourt in terms of all-star candidacy. And I will spend the last minute here talking about Jarrett Allen because I'm not sure that he's going to get in. Of course, he did not get a media vote. He didn't rank super high amongst player votes. And I just don't know that now, especially because the Cavs have lost 3 times in the last 10 days or so, I'm not sure they're going to get 4. I think that they are going to get 3. I think Darius will be there. We know, obviously, Donovan will be starting the game. And I think Evan Mobley will be there. I think all of those things are very clear after what we learned on Thursday night. But I'm also not sure that the avenue for Jarrett Allen to get there is as wide as maybe it was 10 days ago. I think that for the Cavs to have 4 All-Stars, they were going to need to have a lot of success as a team. And they have had a lot of success as a team. But I think because they've had, by their standards, a rough week because they've lost a couple of games, I do think that might be something that does affect Jarrett Allen getting in. But I think that after Thursday night, there's no doubt Darius Garland and Evan Mobley are both going to be all-stars this year for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Well, Jarrett Allen, that last 2-minute report came out. Let's talk about that and just how it doesn't mean anything next, right here on the Friday 5 edition of Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers on FanDuel can bet $5 and get $300, 300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. Playoffs coming up this weekend. Kansas City, Buffalo, could you ask for a better matchup in the AFC Championship game? It is the Arrowhead Invitational. It feels like that game is played there every single year. Maybe one day the Browns will be there, but Kansas City, as I record this late Thursday night, 1.5-point favorites. I cannot, in good conscience, bet against Patrick Mahomes. I can't do it. Then on the NFC side, Philadelphia, 6.5-point favorites at home over division rivals in the Washington Commanders. Can Jaden Daniels be a rookie playing in the Super Bowl? I don't know that I necessarily buy that. I'm not sure that Washington is ready, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens this weekend. And if you want to have a little bit more fun, head on over to FanDuel, because right now, if you join today, you can get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel. Again, FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. Topic number 3 on the Friday 5. We're going to talk about Jarrett Allen. We're going to talk about Alperen Sengun because, of course, everyone saw what happened in that game on Wednesday night where Alperen Sengun threw a very clear 2-handed shove into Jarrett Allen, knocked Jarrett Allen over. It had nothing to do with the play. That play actually resulted in a game-tying basket for Alperen Sengun. It was a nice basket. And then the game is stopped immediately by one of the officials. And he says, we're going to review this for a hostile act. And of course, afterwards, they say that, it did not reach the level of being unsportsmanlike, which I vehemently disagree with, but that's the way they called it. So, of course, what does everybody do? On Thursday, everybody is patiently waiting for the NBA's last 2-minute report to come out. If you're unfamiliar, what the last 2-minute report does is it in close games that are within 3 points in the final 2 minutes, the NBA will release a report of what the officials got right and what the officials got wrong on notable calls in those final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter and or overtime. This Cavs game obviously qualifies. It was a game that the Rockets won by 1 point. So we got a last 2-minute report that came out early Thursday evening. And you scroll through it, and there was one incorrect non-call. What would that one incorrect non-call be? It would, of course, be the play in which Jarrett Allen was shoved by Alperen Şengün. You can watch it right now. If it's on YouTube, it is on your screen where Jarrett Allen goes to the ground because of the shove by Şengün. And here's what the last 2-minute report says. It says Şengün dislodges Allen during the shot attempt, and a loose ball foul should have been whistled. Instant replay was then utilized after the made basket to determine if an altercation/hostile act had occurred, and referees determined that Şengün did not commit a hostile act. Of course, I disagree with that last part, but basically this leads me to the point of, what does this do? What does this matter? What do we gain from the NBA admitting that this was improperly handled? And I don't even think that they actually admitted that this was improperly handled, because I think at the very least, this should have been a technical foul on Alperen Şengün. It wasn't. The Cavs lost. I don't think that's why they lost. I think they played poorly. That's why they lost. But I don't understand why we need the last 2-minute report. All it does is make people mad. I don't know that this is, and I understand that this can be spun into, well, it is public accountability for the referees. Okay, sure. But what does it change? Is this going to be a call that is called differently next time because the last 2-minute report was made public? Probably not. Is this going to make the Cavs feel better about the loss? Probably not. If you're a Cavs fan, does this change the way you feel about a 1-point loss to the Houston Rockets? I'm going to guess that it doesn't. That if you were frustrated about that game, you're probably still frustrated about that game. And if you're someone like me who thought that the Cavs didn't necessarily deserve to win because they didn't play well for 3/4 of that game, this doesn't change anything. All it does is it makes people upset. I believe that it makes fans upset. It probably makes officials upset that their work is being critiqued publicly. I understand that's part of the job, but I just don't understand at this point. And this is not something that's new. This is something that has been around for a long time. But at this point, I don't understand what anyone gains from the last 2-minute report. Yeah, officials screw up calls. They're going to screw up calls forever. That's part of the game because officials are human and they're going to get things wrong. That happens in every sport. It will happen forever. Those guys are not flawless, and expecting them to be flawless is silly. Do I think that they missed this big time? I do. But you know what? Criticizing it in the last 2-minute report, releasing it publicly, and nothing actually changing because of it, just that's where I'm a little bit lost here. Because at the end of the day, the game result doesn't change. You don't get to go back and say, oh, well, they got that call wrong. We're going to start the game over at that point, no matter how big or little that call was in the impact of the game. There are calls missed that are just as consequential with 8 minutes left to go as there are with 2 minutes left to go. I just think at this point, what are we doing? What's the point of this? I don't know that we need this. And that was another thing I was reminded of when I clicked on the last 2-minute report on Thursday and saw they got this one wrong. It doesn't change anything. Well, Kenny Atkinson, of course, going to get honored here very shortly. And yes, Evan Mobley out again on Friday. We're going to talk about his calf injury next, right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, communicate more effectively, but finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And It's convenient. You can have the sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans. And for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code SPACE80, SPACE 80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Again, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code SPACE80. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Up next, we are talking injuries because Evan Mobley, he's missed the last couple of games. Isaac Okoro, he has missed the last few games for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I think that these are injuries where the Cavs have built up enough time or enough of a lead in the Eastern Conference to make it so that they don't have to rush guys back, and they shouldn't be rushing guys back because you look at Evan's injury, and Cav injuries can be tricky. I think as we've seen in the NBA, if you follow the league and not only the Cavs, you know this to be the case. And Evan is obviously a very, very important player for what the Cavs do. And with the lead that the Cavs have built in the Eastern Conference, where, as I talked to you on Friday here, the Cavs have a 6-game lead over Boston after the Celtics lost to the Los Angeles Lakers on Thursday night. And of course, the Celtics are 10-10 in their last 20 games. They haven't been very good. And I just think that with how good the Cavs have been, where the rest of the East sits right now, the focus for Cleveland should be on getting the 1 seed. That should be a very important thing. And I think for the Cavs to get the 1 seed, they don't need to rush Evan Mobley back. They don't need to rush Isaac Okoro back from these, what I believe are tricky injuries, because you look at a calf injury that can go from a minor thing to a major thing really quickly. And the last thing the Cavs want is with Evan Mobley, it's to go from a minor thing to even maybe not a major thing, but a moderate thing. They wanted to keep it as a minor thing. Kenny Atkinson has told the media that he believes it is something that is day-to-day rather than a long-term serious concern. And I just think that doing everything possible to make sure it stays that way, instead of this being an injury that maybe Evan rushes back from and re-aggravates because he wasn't at 100%, I think that should be avoided at all costs. And then with Isaac Okoro, obviously that shoulder injury has been one that has lingered because he first hurt that shoulder, I believe December 13th was the day when the Cavs were in Brooklyn taking on the Nets. I think he ran into a Ben Simmons screen, AC joint sprain, missed the next couple of weeks. I think it was 3 weeks. And then when he came back to the floor, couldn't really shoot. He was 1 of 17 on threes in the 5 games that he played after returning from that shoulder injury. And now he's been back on the shelf. And I just think that, especially because it is his shoulder injury, that or is his shooting shoulder, that makes it much more difficult to deal with. If this were his left shoulder, I do wonder, would he be playing right now? But the fact that it is his shooting shoulder, I think complicates things a little bit, because he was not shooting the basketball well when he came back. Before he got injured, Isaac Okoro was one of the best by percentage shooters in the NBA. He was shooting 48% on threes. It's not to say he can't be that guy again, but if he's not healthy, if he's not comfortable shooting the basketball with that shoulder, it's very difficult for me to see him being a very effective offensive player. Now, defensively, I have no doubts about what he can still be, injured or not injured, but I think offensively, for him to really have a role on this team, he needs to pull his weight on the offensive end of the floor. Before the injury, he was absolutely doing that. He was terrific, but since the injury, he looked uncomfortable. He couldn't make shots. He looked like somebody who didn't necessarily belong on the floor offensively because he was hurt. And I think that we've seen that. And I do wonder now how much longer this is going to be, because if they're truly waiting for him to be 100%, as I mentioned, shoulders can be very tricky. It might be a little while. Now, I don't know how fast Isaac Okoro is going to heal. I don't know the true extent of that injury. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend to be a doctor, but what I've seen is that the shooting looked uncomfortable when he first came back. And as I mentioned, the Cavs have built up a cushion, and they should utilize that cushion. That cushion, them winning 70 games is not the goal. I think the goal for the rest of the regular season for the Cavs, be the 1 seed. Finish with the most wins in the Eastern Conference. If they finish with the most wins in the NBA, if they have a better record than OKC, who lost last night to Oklahoma or to Dallas, that's great too. But overall, I think the goal should be, let's have a better record than Boston, because the Cavs should want to start every playoff series they can inside Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, and they should want to finish every series they can with a Game 7 inside Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. And if they can do that while not having to rush guys back from injury, I think that's exactly what the goal should be. All right, fifth and final thing on this Friday 5 edition of Locked On Cavs. Kenny Atkinson was officially named the All-Star coach for the Eastern Conference very late Thursday night, or I guess technically very early Friday morning, when the Los Angeles Lakers beat the Boston Celtics by, I believe, 21 points. Like, that was a blowout, and it was not necessarily even as close as the final score. But this is a very deserved honor for Kenny Atkinson. And yes, it's an honor that goes to the coach of the team who has the most wins as of February 2nd this year, which the Cavs have clinched now after Boston's loss. And the other caveat is, if you were the All-Star coach the year before, you can't do it. Well, the Celtics had the All-Star coach 2 years back, so that meant that they didn't get to do it last year. So it meant Joe Mazzulla was actually eligible this year, but the Cavs have clinched a better record than Boston through February 2nd. And I think that this honor for Kenny Atkinson, while it is one that is not selected by anybody, it is entirely record-based, I think it's very deserving for Kenny. I think it speaks to the growth that he has made as a coach from his previous stop as a head coach in Brooklyn, even from who he was as an assistant in Atlanta. I think he learned a lot during his last stint in Golden State alongside Steve Kerr. And I think that we have seen him put all of that into practice. The way that this offense has evolved from what it was last year under JB Bickerstaff to what it has been under Kenny Atkinson and the rest of his coaching staff is a drastic thing. It is a very, very big difference in how they play basketball on the offensive end of the floor. And that has led to, obviously, some terrific results where they have been, throughout the entire course of the season, the number one offense. I think there might have been 3 or 4 days where they didn't technically have the best offense in basketball. But I think that it speaks to what they've done offensively and the way that the players have developed too. And I don't think that Kenny Atkinson deserves all of the credit for Evan Mobley being awesome. Like, I think Evan Mobley deserves a lot of that credit. I don't think Kenny Atkinson deserves all of the credit for Darius Garland having a bounce back season. I think Darius Garland deserves most of that credit. But I also think Kenny Atkinson does deserve some credit in those areas. I think that the fact that he's been able to put together in an environment where those guys can thrive the way they have speaks a lot to who Kenny is as a coach and how he's going to operate moving forward. And the fact that, Jared Allen, somebody that I didn't necessarily think could fit alongside Evan Mobley the way he has, certainly did not think that he could be an all-star while playing alongside Evan Mobley. Kenny's gotten the most out of everybody. And I think that is the sign of a really good coach. And I think that is the sign of some really good things to come for this team ultimately when the playoffs arrive. As I mentioned, it's Kenny Atkinson's first time being an all-star head coach, and he deserves the honor. And it's really, really cool to see that honor given to him, because the Cavs have been the best team in basketball, certainly in the Eastern Conference, for the entire season. And the fact that they're getting recognized with all-stars, obviously one starting in Donovan Mitchell, I believe at least 2 more in Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, and an all-star coach. And there will be an assistant that coaches one of the all-star teams, because the way that it's broken up now, that's just how it's going to work. Maybe it's our friend Jordan Knott, who, of course, if you missed it, was on the earlier Friday edition of Locked On Cavs. So make sure you go check that out. If you haven't already, great sit down with him. Really enjoyed getting to catch up and, learn a little bit more about how the Cavs are operating this year. But I do want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today, making it your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs. I'll be back after the Sixers game.